Cobtown was not like other towns, not at all, especially not in October. When the leaves turned orange and gold, and a chill slithered into the air, Cobtown came alive. Or maybe it came undead. Every house on every street tried to be the spookiest. Giant, hairy spiders crawled up the sides of mailboxes, green-faced witches with long, crooked noses peeked out from behind curtains. Skeletons sat on porch swings waving their bony hands at people who walked by. It was a Halloween paradise, or a Halloween nightmare, depending on who you asked. The town loved it. They loved the screams. They loved the scares. The mayor gave out a prize every year for the best decorated house. This made everyone try even harder. Mr. Gable on Elm Street covered his entire lawn with fake tombstones. Each one had a funny name written on it, like Barry D. Alive and Emma Goner. Mrs. Higgins next door had a cauldron that bubbled with green smoke all day and all night. It smelled like rotten eggs and old socks, but everyone agreed it was very spooky. The whole town buzzed with excitement. Kids planned their costumes for months. Would they be a ghost, a vampire, a monster from their favorite movie? In Cobtown, Halloween wasn't just one night. It was a whole season of fun and fright. But it wasn't just the decorations that made Cobtown special. It was the feeling in the air, a feeling that anything could happen. You might turn a corner and see a scarecrow that wasn't there a minute ago, or you might hear a strange howling sound coming from the woods that wasn't a dog. The adults laughed and said it was all part of the fun. They said it was just the wind or someone playing a trick, but the kids knew better. They knew that in Cobtown, some things weren't just a trick. Some things were real. And this year felt different. It felt heavier. The closer it got to Halloween, the more the town seemed to change. The plastic bats hanging from trees seemed to twitch their wings when no one was looking. The scarecrows in the cornfields seemed to turn their heads, their button eyes following you as you passed. Even the smiling jack-o'-lanterns on every porch seemed to have a secret. Their grins looked a little too wide, a little too hungry. The air grew colder, and the shadows grew longer. Everyone was getting ready for Halloween. But maybe, just maybe, Halloween was also getting ready for them. It was waiting, it was watching, and it was almost here. Most of the scary things in Cobtown were fake. The ghosts were just sheets. The monsters were just plastic. But there was one story, one legend, that wasn't fake. It was a story the adults only whispered about when they thought the kids weren't listening. They called it The Legend of the 11th Year. It was a dark secret that the town tried to forget but never could. The story said that every 11 years the fun of Halloween turned into real fear. The fake scares became real. The line between tricks and terror disappeared completely, and no one was safe. The legend began a long, long time ago. It said that on the 11th year, strange things started to happen in the week before Halloween. Decorations would move on their own. Lifeless plastic skeletons would climb down from the roofs they were perched on. Inflatable black cats would hiss, a real angry hiss that made your hair stand on end. And then, there were the vines. Thick, thorny vines, as black as night, would suddenly start growing everywhere. They would snake out of the ground, wrap around houses, and creep through open windows. But that wasn't even the worst part of the story. The worst part was the disappearances. Every 11 years, kids would vanish, just gone. One day they were carving pumpkins or planning their trick-or-treat route, and the next, they were nowhere to be found. No one ever knew where they went. The police would search, the whole town would look, but it was like they had been erased. The legend also spoke of a visitor, a tall, shadowy figure in a dark, hooded robe carrying a long, curved scythe. They called him the Reaper. He didn't take the children. Instead, he was seen visiting places where something sad had happened, a silent, creepy observer of the town's sorrow. This year was an 11th year. The adults didn't talk about it. They put up their decorations and planned their parties, pretending everything was normal. They told themselves it was just a silly old story, a ghost tale to scare tourists. But they locked their doors a little tighter at night. They watched their children a little more closely when they played outside. They couldn't help but remember the last time, 11 years ago, and the time before that. The town of Cobtown was famous for its spooky Halloween, but the legend was a secret it wished it could bury forever, a secret that was about to crawl out of its grave. June didn't know about the legend. She and her dad had just moved to Cobtown 2 months ago. They moved into the oldest house in town, a big spooky place at the end of a long, quiet street. The house had peeling gray paint, windows that looked like tired eyes, and a porch that groaned every time you stepped on it. The kids at school called it the Blackwood House. They said it was haunted. June didn't care. Nothing could be scarier than what had already happened to her. Her mom had died last year. The sadness was a heavy blanket she carried with her everywhere. Her dad said they needed a fresh start. A new town, a new house, a new life. But the new house felt old. It was filled with shadows and strange noises. The floors creaked upstairs when no one was there. The doors would slowly swing open on their own. June's dad was a kind man, but he was always sad now. He spent most of his time in his study, surrounded by books, trying to forget. He told June the house just had character, but June thought the house had something else. Something that watched her from the dark corners of its empty rooms. June wasn't excited about Halloween. How could she be? Back home, Halloween had been her mom's favorite holiday. They would decorate the whole house together, carve pumpkins with silly faces, and her mom would make the best candy apples. Now the thought of Halloween just made her feel empty. Her dad had tried to get into the spirit. He bought a single, sad-looking pumpkin and placed it on the groaning front porch. It sat there, uncarved, looking as lonely as June felt. She missed her mom. She missed her old house. She hated this new creepy house in this new creepy town. The other kids in Cobtown were friendly enough, but they kept their distance. They asked her if she'd seen the ghost in the Blackwood House yet. They told her stories about a woman in a white dress who floated through the halls at night. June would just shrug and walk away. She didn't want to talk about ghosts. She had enough darkness inside her already. She didn't need to invite more in. But the house didn't seem to care what she wanted. It had its own plans. And as the days ticked closer to Halloween, June started to feel like she and her dad weren't the only ones living there. The strange things started small. At first, June thought it was just her imagination. She would be doing her homework in her room, and she would hear a faint scratching sound. It sounded like it was coming from inside the walls. Scratch, scrape, scratch. She told her dad about it. He went and checked the attic. "Probably just mice, Junebug," he said, ruffling her hair. "Old houses have mice." But the sound didn't sound like mice. It sounded bigger. It sounded like long, sharp fingernails dragging slowly against the wood, right behind the flowered wallpaper. Then came the whispers. They were so quiet, she could barely hear them. They happened late at night, when the house was dark and silent. It sounded like people talking in another room, their voices too low to make out the words. Just a soft, constant murmur. Hush, shh, shh. One night, she tiptoed out of her room and pressed her ear against the wall in the hallway. The whispering was louder there. It seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. It made the little hairs on her arms stand up. She ran back to her bed and pulled the covers over her head, her heart thumping like a drum. June tried to ignore it all. She tried to tell herself it was just the wind, or the pipes, or her mind playing tricks on her because she was in a new, scary place. She didn't want to worry her dad. He was already so sad. So she kept the scratching and the whispering to herself. She turned up her music to drown out the sounds. She tried to focus on her schoolwork, but the house wouldn't let her forget. One afternoon, she came home from school and found a thin, black vine poking through a crack in the floorboards of her bedroom. It was no thicker than a pencil with tiny, sharp thorns. She had never seen it before. She bent down to touch it, but then pulled her hand back. It looked wrong. It was too dark, too spiky. Where did it come from? She grabbed a pair of scissors from her desk and snipped the vine at the floor. It made a wet, snapping sound. She threw the little piece in the trash and pushed her rug over the crack in the floor. Out of sight, out of mind, she told herself. But that night, as she lay in bed, she thought she could hear it. A very faint, very slow sound. The sound of something growing in the dark. scratch, scrape, grow. Jack loved Halloween more than anyone. His family owned the Cobtown Pumpkin Patch, and for him, October was the best month of the year. He spent his days after school helping his dad, surrounded by thousands of pumpkins. Big ones, small ones, round ones, and lumpy ones. The air smelled of dirt and pumpkin guts and sweet apple cider from their farm stand. He loved the happy families who came to pick out the perfect pumpkin. He loved the hay rides and the corn maze. For Jack, Halloween was all about fun, not fear. He didn't believe in ghosts or monsters. It was all just stories. This year, however, things were a bit different. An old man had started hanging around the pumpkin patch. He was a strange man with wild white hair and eyes that seemed to see right through you. He never bought a pumpkin. He just sat on a hay bale near the edge of the cornfield, whittling little wooden figures with a crooked knife. He would tell stories to anyone who would listen. Scary stories. Stories about monsters with glowing red eyes that lived in the corn. Stories about creatures that came out only on Halloween, hungry for more than just candy. Jack's dad told him to stay away from the old man. "He's just trying to scare people, son," his dad said. "Don't listen to his nonsense." But Jack was curious. One afternoon, when the patch was quiet, Jack walked over to the old man. The man looked up and smiled, a smile that didn't reach his worried eyes. "You work here," the old man said. "It wasn't a question. You see the pumpkins, but do you see what's between them? Do you see what watches from the corn?" He held up one of his carvings. It was a horrible little monster with long arms and too many teeth. "It's just a story," Jack said, trying to sound brave. The old man shook his head slowly. "Stories come from somewhere, boy. They are echoes of the truth." He opened a small leather pouch and tipped it over. A single long black thorn fell into his palm. It was at least 3 inches long and wickedly sharp. "Found this in the maze this morning. The vines are back. They only come in the 11th year. They're like veins, see? They feed the darkness. You be careful, boy. The monsters are real. And this year, they're waking up." Jack stared at the thorn, a cold feeling creeping into his stomach. Jack tried to laugh it off. A thorn? It could have come from any bush. And the stories were just stories. He said goodbye to the old man and went back to work loading pumpkins into a wheelbarrow. But the old man's words stuck in his head. The monsters are real. As the sun began to set, casting long, spooky shadows across the fields, Jack started to feel a little uneasy. The scarecrow in the middle of the patch seemed to be staring right at him. Its stitched-on smile looked less friendly and more like a warning. He finished his chores quickly, eager to get home before it got too dark. He rode his bike down the long dirt road that led from the pumpkin patch to the main street. The road was lined with tall corn on one side and a dark, thick woods on the other. Usually, he loved this ride. The cool evening air, the sound of crickets, the setting sun. But tonight, it felt different. The woods seemed darker. The corn seemed taller. He kept glancing over his shoulder, feeling like he was being watched. He pedaled faster, his heart starting to beat a little harder. The old man's carved monster flashed in his mind. "It's just a story," he told himself again. But he didn't believe it as much this time. Suddenly, his bike chain slipped. Clank! The pedals spun uselessly and the bike coasted to a stop. "Oh, come on!" Jack groaned. He hopped off and knelt down to fix it, his fingers fumbling with the greasy chain. It was getting darker by the second. The only light came from the moon, which was just a sliver in the sky. As he worked, he heard a sound from the cornfield, a rustling sound, not like the wind. It was a heavy, dragging sound. Shh, thump, shh, thump. It was getting closer. Jack's head snapped up. He stared into the wall of corn stalks. He couldn't see anything, but he could hear it. Shh, thump. It was right on the other side of the stalks now. Something big, something heavy. He could hear it breathing, a low, wet, gurgling breath. He scrambled to his feet, forgetting all about the chain. His eyes were wide with terror. And then he saw it. A shadow, a huge, misshapen shadow fell across the road in front of him. It was tall and stooped, with long, spindly arms that almost touched the ground. The shadow moved, and Jack didn't wait to see what was casting it. He dropped his bike and ran. He ran as fast as he could, not daring to look back. Tommy loved Halloween, but Halloween did not seem to love him back. He loved the candy, the costumes, and the spooky movies. But he was, to put it simply, a scaredy cat. Every little noise made him jump. Every shadow looked like a monster. And this year, his personal nightmare was living in his own front yard. His dad, who loved to compete for the town's decorating prize, had bought a new decoration. It was a 12-foot tall skeleton. It towered over their house, its bony arms outstretched, its empty eye sockets staring right into Tommy's bedroom window. "Isn't it great, sport?" his dad had boomed, clapping him on the back. "We're definitely going to win this year." Tommy had tried to smile, but it felt more like a grimace. The skeleton was terrifying. During the day, it was just a giant piece of plastic. But at night, when his dad turned on the purple spotlights, it looked horribly real. Its long skeletal fingers seemed to be reaching for him. Its grinning jaw seemed to mock his fear. Tommy had to close his curtains every night before he could even think about sleeping. He hated that skeleton. He hated it more than anything. Tommy's parents didn't understand his fear. "It's just plastic, Tommy," his mom would say gently. "It can't hurt you." But Tommy wasn't so sure. He had seen things. Or he thought he had. One windy afternoon, he was watching it from the living room window. The wind was making the skeleton's arms sway back and forth. But for just a second, Tommy could have sworn he saw the skeleton turn its head. Its giant skull moved just an inch, its empty eyes seeming to follow him as he moved away from the window. He blinked, and it was facing forward again. It was just the wind, he told himself. Just the wind. His friends, of course, thought the skeleton was the coolest thing ever. They would come over and dare each other to touch its bony feet. "You're so lucky," his friend Sam said. "I wish my dad would get one of these." Tommy didn't feel lucky. He felt cursed. Every time he left his house, he had to walk under the skeleton's shadow. Every time he came home, its giant, grinning face was the first thing he saw. It was a constant, 12-foot-tall reminder of everything that scared him. And with Halloween getting closer, Tommy had a very bad feeling that his fear was only going to get bigger. One evening, Tommy was in his room trying to build a new Lego set. He was trying to distract himself from the giant monster in his yard. He had his little clock radio on, listening to the local Cobtown station. They were doing a special Halloween show, telling local ghost stories. Usually, Tommy would turn this off immediately, but tonight, he was frozen in place by what the radio host was saying. He was talking about the legend of the 11th year. Tommy had heard bits and pieces of the story before, but he had never heard it told like this. The host's voice was low and serious. "Folks, some people say it's just a story," the radio host said, his voice crackling. "But the town records don't lie. Every 11 years, the week before Halloween, things happen. Decorations that aren't just decorations. Black vines that grow out of nowhere. And the disappearances..." Tommy felt a shiver run down his spine. He glanced at his curtains, making sure they were tightly closed. He didn't want to see the skeleton. The host continued, talking about the Reaper and how he only appeared in places of great sadness. It all sounded too real. It sounded like more than just a spooky story for the radio. Then the radio show started taking calls. The first caller was a woman with a shaky voice. "My brother, he disappeared 11 years ago," she whispered. "He was 10. He loved Halloween. He went out to play in the yard, and we never saw him again. We found one of his shoes near the old woods, and it was covered in these strange black thorns." Tommy's eyes grew wide. Black thorns. He thought about the old Blackwood house at the end of the street where the new girl lived. He'd seen strange dark vines starting to creep up the side of that house just yesterday. Suddenly, the radio made a loud static sound. Kshh! The host's voice was gone. Tommy fiddled with the dial, but it was just noise. Then through the static, a new voice came through. It was a child's voice, a little girl, and she was singing a creepy little song. "Shadows creep and monsters crawl, 11 years it takes us all. Close your eyes and count to 10. You will never see us again." The voice was clear for a moment, and then it was swallowed by static again. Tommy clicked the radio off, his hands trembling. That wasn't part of the show. He was sure of it. It sounded like it came from a long, long time ago. Later that night, the real fear began. For June, it started with a sound from downstairs, a loud crash, like a stack of plates falling. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding. "Dad," she called out. No answer. She slipped out of bed and crept to her door, opening it a crack. The hallway was dark, but she could see a faint, flickering light coming from the bottom of the stairs. It was a strange, greenish light. Taking a deep breath, she tiptoed down the creaking steps. The green light was coming from the living room. She peeked around the corner, and she saw it. The single, lonely pumpkin from the porch was now in the middle of the living room floor. A jagged, angry face had been carved into it, and a sickly green light was glowing from within. And all around it, dozens of thick black vines were pushing up through the floorboards, writhing like snakes. At the same moment, across town, Jack was in his bed, trying to forget the shadow on the road. He told himself it was a trick of the light, a deer, anything but a monster. He closed his eyes, but the gurgling breathing sound echoed in his ears. Then he heard a noise from outside his window. Tap, tap, tap. It was a slow, deliberate sound, not a tree branch. He tried to ignore it. Tap, tap, tap. Louder this time. With shaking hands, Jack pulled back his curtain just a tiny bit. He wished he hadn't. Staring back at him from the other side of the glass was a face made of rotting pumpkin and tangled corn husks. It was the scarecrow from the field. Its button eyes glowed with a faint red light, and it lifted a hand made of sticks and straw to tap on the glass again. And in his house, under the shadow of the 12-foot terror, Tommy was also awake. The song from the radio was stuck in his head. He was staring at his closed curtains, terrified of what was on the other side. Suddenly, he heard a loud, groaning sound from the yard. It was a sound of shifting weight of giant plastic bones moving. Creak, groan. Tommy squeezed his eyes shut. He didn't want to look, but he had to. He crawled to the window and slowly pulled the curtain aside. The purple spotlights were on, and the giant skeleton was no longer standing still. It was moving. It took a slow, heavy step forward, then another. It was walking, its huge skull turning to look directly at Tommy's window. Its jaw dropped open, and a horrible, rattling laugh echoed through the night, a sound that wasn't coming from any speaker. The three children were miles apart, each trapped in their own nightmare. A haunted house coming to life, a scarecrow that could walk, a plastic skeleton with a mind of its own. This was no story. This was not a trick. The 11th year had arrived in Cobtown, and the haunting had just begun. They were scared, more scared than they had ever been in their lives. But deep inside, a tiny spark of fight began to glow. They couldn't just hide under their covers. They had to face it. But how do you fight a nightmare that has come to life? That was a question they would have to answer if they survived the night.